All right, thank you. I would like to call the HR Committee working session meeting to order on January 14th. Member Oswald, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Member Eater is out of town. Member Kirby.
Here.
Member Laffer-Kemp is out of town. Chair Lofalt.
Here.
I am here. Paul Sandholm is out of town. Member Trinka.
Here.
Superintendent Graseth. Assistant Superintendent Jeff Horton.
Here.
I think Deputy Clerk Erickson is excused for the HR meeting, but I'm not sure. Okay, you'll be here. We have a quorum.
Thank you.
Barely.
All right. So, HR Committee, first item is staffing report. Mr. Swirsky, any particular thing you'd like to tell us?
It's pretty standard this month. Actually, it's a little bit shorter than we usually see, but pretty routine.
Are there any questions about the staffing report? None? Good. Make this efficient. Our action item is the second reading of the nepotism policy number 426. Is there any comment on this? Member?
Sometimes I would really like HR Director Mr. Swirsky to speak first, but we are in our second reading of this, and we have had it on our agenda for a long time, and it looks like a great policy, but I do want to caution our board and think about, one, not a lot of us are here today to share that, and I just want to say that I'm excited that my fellow board members are at a school board conference, so they are missing today because they are down at the convention and learning a lot of great stuff, and I'm looking forward to joining them tomorrow. But this will be the second reading, but we don't have to necessarily pass it into action, because I would like to have a plan from the board as a direction to how our administration is going to carry this out once it is a policy. So yes, I think the policy looks good. I think it looks language-wise, and the intent is what we want. But until I think we have an idea of how we want our administration to carry it out, might just take us another board meeting. And I'm not saying that to kill it or anything. I'm just saying that sometimes I think when we get to the second reading, we just assume we pass it, but we could also table it or just say we're still kind of looking. I don't know. Maybe my administration wants to pull in or say, but I just think that we have to understand what this policy might affect for our buildings and our staff.
Superintendent.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think that we could do it in phases. I think that anything from this point forward, any new hires, that this would be in place. It will take us some effort to find out who throughout the district this may apply to. In education, it's not uncommon to have husbands and wives and parents and children all in education. And I know throughout the district that we do have several educational families. It will take a review of our staffing at different levels to see if this nepotism policy would apply to any of the people that we have in place. I know there are at least a few circumstances that would be affected with this policy and require us to have some process in addressing those. So the implementation may take a while. I think if there were any situations that needed to have people changing positions or changing sites, that would most easily be accomplished over the summer rather than partway through a year. And so I think we're asking for some grace period to have this fully implemented or to have documentation in place for any reasons that we think there might be an exception to the policy.
I do note that Section 6 does address that, addressing existing conflicts and changes in relationships. And I don't, personally, I don't think we can address every potential problem when they come up. The policy seems to or wants to establish a consistent employment guidelines, which it does, and outlines and defines those. So that's my opinion. Member Oswald.
Thank you. I believe what you're talking about in not passing this versus passing it, I think we can still pass it, and that they develop a regulation to go along with the policy, and that's where it details how and when and why you implement it and that sort of thing. And so even, I don't know that we need to include language into that it'll go into effect once a regulation's formed or something of that sort. But I'm comfortable with passing it, knowing that it's going to take some time, and it's unclear on who or what this affects. And so that's what I would recommend, is that a regulation be developed.
Anyone else?
Does that sound agreeable, Superintendent and HR Swirsky, or is there something we as a board need to make sure needs addressing?
Yeah, there's some provisions in there for making exceptions, and in looking at this, would we be more lenient towards those exceptions for pre-existing relationships versus where we're going, or do we I'm not opposed to the idea of grandfathering people in and watching for further instances that might be conflicts. I mean, Duluth is kind of a big, small town. And it's not hard to run into friends and relatives here in some of the working relationships that you probably wouldn't have as much in a metropolitan area, major metropolitan area. So I'm just wondering, I'm thinking we're a little bit hesitant as to how we're going to implement this, and I would probably say, rather than just pass it and then worry about it, I'd say we maybe have those implementation issues ironed out before we pass it.
Yeah, so I guess my recommendation would be, in terms of how to operationalize policy, that's the responsibility of staff, and it's not our, I don't think you want us in that business. I think from the genesis of this conversation was focused around the fact that Duluth is a big, small town, and it was in direct reaction to another city body or another entity in the community that was struggling with this, and recognizing that a lot of school districts have an anti-nepotism policy. So I think we would look to you to figure out I would look to you to figure out how to operationalize it if and when we pass it.
Superintendent.
Thank you. I don't think that a regulation per se is needed. I think more the leeway for the implementation. I agree that we can implement it with the understanding that it may not, it's not going to be in place the day after it's passed, that it's going to take some time to address any issues. And Section 6 does lay out the expectations and that we share any of those relationships with the board. What I was suggesting is that maybe there's a timeline given, that the expectation that you would have those identified and how they were addressed in some time frame.
Does that need to be in the policy, or can that be a chair recommendation? Okay.
Okay, anything else on this policy? All right. Next informational item is our superintendent search update, and we happen to have the two liaisons here who could give us an update.
You want to start?
Well, I did receive a request by two of the liaisons that they would like to kind of bring us up to speed with some of the information, and I did bring some copies of some of the information that's out there, but go ahead.
Well, we're excited that things are moving forward. Thank you for working with us and for supporting us and giving us permission to be confused as well, right? But right now it's exciting. I think the news didn't always capture the other night. I was on camera for celebrating the rollout, the public rollout, but they decided to focus on just transparency and how much we are open and willing to share, and that was good too. I mean, that was something that needed to be shared again. But I was more interested in, it was Monday, it was the press release, we were rolling out kind of the community. And I tried to share how much back work our staff has done in order for the press release to have come, and so. We've been working and connecting with our BWP consultants. They're very willing to share. We've had our individual board interviews with the BWP, and there was probably some rough spots because we all did it over the internet or over our phones, but I happened to be able to connect on Zoom, and it worked really well, and I just thought that that's a really option for us because I just thought it did work well. I mean, not necessarily for things that are our community or even for our whole board, but one-on-one connections if we felt there was some issues or small, I don't know. But so our individual interviews were done, and there was some contact with setting out our focus groups. Right? Is that where we are? And then I'm going to turn that over to Alana.
Since I was in charge of getting the invitations out for the focus groups, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that it went up to 148 emails now that went out to various organizations and leaders of organizations who are in charge of picking their own one or two people that are able to show up at the required time of the focus group that they're invited to attend. And I'm getting some great responses. I decided to be the person to receive the RSVPs because it's just, throwing one more person in the mix wouldn't be fun. And I'm getting great responses, and I'm able to respond to questions and things like that. So it's moving right along, and I didn't get any bounce back emails, so yay me. And, and I just want to encourage anybody that thinks of any other organizations that they didn't notice included or want to make sure we're included to just ask, and I will make sure, because that's how we moved up from 143 to 148. So there are some that might slip through the cracks. So we don't want to miss anybody, so let us know.
So just piggybacking on that too, our board is not here, but I think there's a way that Melinda can send out information. Melinda will send out information about the focus groups. We've sent out the email, but we're really interested in board kind of looking over and seeing if there's something from our community that you feel we haven't reached out to, any groups that and just we'd also so we sent out an initial invite through email, but we all know that isn't always the only way or the more personal way to make sure they show up. It's really important for January 27th. So in our earlier, do you remember when we talked about how each of us would take a section? Our sections are kind of like families, community, diverse, nonprofit, city leadership, and we'd really like any board member that would volunteer to take a group and either call them or re-email. Are we planning to re-email again, or even sending a written note to remind them that they have been invited and that we're looking forward to their presence?
I plan on engaging them next week with the links to both the boundary survey and the superintendent survey to distribute among their organizations, and then sending a follow-up email the Wednesday or Thursday before the Monday meeting to as a reminder email to make sure they come.
Okay, we have a survey that's online. That's open until the 24th of January at noon. Excuse me. The focus groups are going to be the 27th, and there's a walk-in focus group for anybody at Denfeld at the end of that day. 5:30. Excuse me. And tentatively, we have a committee of the whole scheduled for the next day. I don't know if that has been finalized yet.
I would like just some feedback about 4:30 versus 5. If we can do 4:30, that would be great. That's kind of tentatively what's on there. But I also know that some of us work till 4:30 or even maybe work till 5. So we can pretty much adjust it right now. It's still enough time. It's on our calendars as January 28th at 4:30, but it can go to whenever our board can be there. This is where BWP will give us their results and their direction as far as how the leadership profile is, how they're suggesting we craft our leadership profile based off the focus groups and the online surveys. And we got an email from Katie Kaufman earlier today with the number of online surveys completed, and it was 700 and some, 771, something like that. That right now it's been up for, when did it roll out? Last Thursday, I think it was. And so that's a nice return, but we could even do more. The other thing the board can, the board was advised in a meeting, an open meeting that we were all at, that we are not a part of the focus group, that we don't have to be there. Member Oswald and I think that we're the ones that are going to transport our two consultants to where they need to be, but if there is someone else, I don't want to assume that we are the only ones that can help out transporting them. They have to get to East and Denfeld just a few times during the day. I think Member Oswald did a really great job of streamlining. I had them going to all kinds of places throughout the community, but I think it works best to have them pretty centered here. And then the other thing, I'm not sure if we're going to have parent kind of welcome table, but we should have a welcome table at both sites for when the groups arrive, just getting them here, just when they arrive. And I don't know if that's board members or if that's adults or if that's kids, but that's something you could give us feedback to. Some kind of a table at the entrance of this building and also at Denfeld to get the people where they need to be.
And my thought on that was that Jill and I, or whoever ends up transporting them, would be the greeters at the door and pointing out how to get to where they need to go. And that would be as far involved as we would possibly be, because we truly want this to be an experience with our consultants. We paid them to do this, so we're going to get our money's worth. And I just looked up the actual number. It was 716 as of this morning, surveys that were completed.
All right, thank you. I think the vacancy has been listed on the BWP website. I don't think anywhere else at this point in time. And we're waiting.
Yes, there's
on
listed? The national site, the ASA, is that it?
ASA?
Okay.
Okay. And we're waiting for the leadership profile. Now, my question to you is that going to be developed at the committee of the whole meeting, the day following the focus groups, or will they just present us with information and we will do that later? That's a lot to do in one day.
Yeah, they'll be looking at the information. My guess would be is they're going to be going through common themes and then probably cleaning that up to get back to you.
I think they develop it.
Yep.
We approve it. And it's
Yep.
Okay. All right.
It's not what we want. I guess they go back and do it again.
Okay. All right. So the 27th and the 28th are the dates we're looking forward to now, and the survey closes on the 24th. So, all right. Anything else on superintendent search?
Just to give us a kind of a view for our own personal agendas, at least in my mind, this is my opinion. February looks kind of calm because the applications will be coming in, our consultants will be recruiting and looking and doing all that, and we'll be meeting and doing other things, and then March looks busy. We have a calendar that puts it in weeks, like in this week we're going to be doing this, and in this week we're going to be doing this, but it's not the whole week, and it's not every day. It's probably one day of that month. But that being said, it has to be a day we can all figure out to be there. So just a heads up.
All right. Anything else? There are no future items at this point, so that concludes the HR committee meeting.
Thank you. We'll start the business committee meeting with the financial report. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Trinka. I will take roll for the second time. Member Eder is again absent. Member Kirby? Here. Member Loeffler-Kemp is again absent. Member Lofall? Here. Alana Oswald, that's me. I'm here. Member Sandholm is away, absent, and Member Trinka?
Here.
Superintendent Granza? Here. Assistant Superintendent Horton?
Here.
Deputy Clerk Erickson? All right, we're all here. That should be anyway, I guess.
Great. So we'll start off with the financial report. And I appreciate that you've put on the agenda what would be moved to the consent agenda. So thank you. That's helpful. Looking through the financial reports, opening it up to the table to see if there are any questions. I wanted to touch base with you, CFO Erickson, on where you were at, what your thinking was around potentially rebudgeting based on APUs.
Thank you for that question. At our last meeting, we had talked briefly about our trends, and I'll just reference the APU report that's in our financial reports. It's the two charts and the graph at the bottom. We are projecting at this time slightly higher enrollment as compared to final fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20, keeping in mind that the second semester hasn't started again. We have built in some expected attrition in that second semester. We always understand that with early graduations and more mobility in the second semester that we see some drop in pupil counts, but right now we're considering ourselves very stable in terms of enrollment. We met as a budget committee and talked about increasing our projected APUs or adjusted pupil units from a budget standpoint, and we'd like to bring that forward in February. So we are working on that right now. We believe that there's a happy medium so that we could do an increase. We probably wouldn't project all the way out to what we're seeing at the moment just because we don't know where we're going to end up in terms of total enrollment, but we feel fairly comfortable. And as we shared last month, in addition to increased enrollment, which would then in turn give us some increased revenue, we've also had increased expenditures so far this year. So much of what we would be doing to change the budget on the revenue side would be offset by those things that have happened since the beginning of the school year as well. So we'll be hopefully providing just a general overview on what we see there and then beginning the process of budgeting for fiscal year 21. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. And I think it would be helpful for us to be able to see kind of by category how the revenue and expenses would be, balancing out in theory. So if you could highlight that with the rebudget, that would be great. Thank you. Otherwise, it appears as if the financials are clipping along as were expected. So thank you to the budget team and the finance team for all your hard work on putting this information together. Any questions for anybody else on the financials? Okay. Let's see. And then we had some fundraisers, so thanks for that. Finance education.
I don't have a handout tonight. I was just going to create an outline of some topic areas that we wanted to talk about, but mostly I just wanted to have a little conversation as we're coming into the legislative session in February. When we think about school finance and we think about the areas in which legislation can impact schools, there are many paths that legislation can take that can impact schools. And while traditionally we have a biennium where there's the budget year and then there's what they call the bonding year, and we're actually on that off year. So the budget was done last year. We spent a lot of time at the legislature. We saw some changes. We saw what we would call an omnibus bill, omnibus education bill, that had many components that affected every school district or specific school districts. This year, they focus more on policy and then focus more on bonding, which is not necessary. That's not targeted towards schools. That's targeted towards groups and other municipalities. But as we know, there is currently a surplus that we've heard about in the state. And so there is a chance that we may see funding bills in addition to a bonding bill and other policy related bills. So we're going to be going down to the legislature just like every other district, every other organization to continue to tell our story. And so what I just wanted to share was just kind of the process we went through last year, how we could expect to see our district specific items plus other items that might affect us as a school district in relationship to other school districts in the state. We went to the legislature with our ask about special education, and I know many of you shared that story and heard our story last year, even through the summer, even through the fall. And we shared that story, had a bill that was created that addressed our issue. And then our hope was that that bill would become inclusive into another bill. What we have often in the process of our legislature in Minnesota is those creation of those omnibus bills that are a collection of many individual bills that become this one giant bill. And so we have to be very thoughtful and following and tracking many bills, not just the ones that are our own, because many times we may see individual asks or initiatives that then get included or edited or changed, and then all of a sudden they're things that could affect all of us. And while oftentimes we follow what would be the E12 education omnibus bill, many things that can impact school districts may be found in other bills, especially the tax bill. Oftentimes we may see things running in tandem in other bills where components of things are happening. Last year, especially for us, both the House and the Senate run their own processes, so versions of bills can be in each house, each area, and they may not be exactly alike. So following those processes and understanding where we might be following is just one of those things that we're doing from a leadership standpoint, from the district standpoint, following what our associations and other organizations are sharing on district's behalf of the things that we want to see. Certainly, we know we're going to be getting a 2% increase on the basic allowance for fiscal year 21, but organizations are saying, boy, if you'd like, because of the surplus, if you'd like to give us an additional percentage or an additional dollar amount on top of that, we'd be really grateful. And so there are opportunities where we have some idea of where we're going to be next fiscal year, but there's also that opportunity where we may see some changes. Policy changes can also have a fiscal impact. So when we see changes from a legislative standpoint that may look like this is just a change in process, it may have a cost involved, whether it's just more paperwork or more documentation or having to hire staff that are going to have to implement those things. We need to be thoughtful about those things as well. So as we follow the process, I just wanted you to know and be aware that we are following the associations that we all belong to, either individually or as a district, are following those bills. I'm also very grateful that we have our lobbyists who do the work on our behalf down at the legislature and are there almost on a daily basis, I think I could say, and monitoring the committee work that's happening so that we can, not just for our own say district-specific initiatives, but also education initiatives as a whole. There's been a few times where we got a phone call that said, oh, by the way, these things are happening and we need to be aware of those, so that we were then able to reach out to legislators and people within our district to make sure that they're aware of what was happening. So just really wanted to share with you that as we're coming up on this process, and last year was an early start in January. The session doesn't start until February 11th this year, and we are continuing to work on our special education platform. We were so close to having something last year, and we have continued to dialogue through the entire off season with our legislation, talking to key legislators. They know our story, and we want to continue to share that story. And just following along with what other initiatives are out there, and know that we're working on your behalf, and our lobbyists are, and as we continue to work on that, we will be sharing with you ways that you can share that story too. Legislators appreciate hearing from us, but they also appreciate hearing from board members. They appreciate hearing from our community members. So as we pull together our information and we can make that available, that we have other voices too that are down there supporting our district and supporting schools. So just a overview of that. We'll be following it in multiple places, and if you don't have revisor.mn.gov as your first bookmark, you should, because it's a great place to go on a daily basis that I follow. And monitoring those bills and those versions of bills as we go through, we'll certainly be communicating with you to let you know the status of where we are. So, and open for any questions that we can help you with. And certainly, I think if Jeff wanted to follow up with any other comments, we could bring him in as well.
Member Oswald.
Thank you. For the last couple of years, we've met with our area legislators in a meeting before the legislative season starts. Are we going to do that this year?
We certainly can. We generally do that right after our legislative platform is finalized.
Thank you.
And just a comment on the legislative platform. You saw the text version. We're working on the pretty bifold version, and that should be available hopefully for our board meeting. So you'll see that the content is still the same, but how it looks will just have the photos and the framework on that. So we will have that to you by next Tuesday.
So we'll have all the final language in place, because I know we're supposed to vote on it this week. Okay.
We did see it last month.
Next week, I mean. Yes.
Yep. And it hasn't changed in content. It just will change in format, if that makes any sense. So you saw it just as a one-page text,
right,
and it'll be in the bifold with all of the color and all those things.
Right. I just want to make sure that the information is included in the will be included in the packet for next week, so people can see it ahead of, next Tuesday. That's just what I was clarifying. Go ahead, Superintendent Kratz.
I just wanted to throw in a caveat on a legislative meeting. I know last year it didn't work out because the legislators had already been starting committee meetings and weren't available, so I don't want to commit them to something that they haven't agreed to yet.
I think what you're hearing from us is a desire to try to ask them to commit. So, great. Thank you for that, CFO Erickson. And thank you for all the work all the leadership that you have at MDE and at the state level too, helping to support strong school finances. We appreciate that. Great. Moving on, we didn't have any bids, RFPs, or quotes. So moving on to policies and regulations, starting with new regulation 511R on fundraising. And this is just the one that we approved before, right? It's just a reminder?
So last month you approved the policy. This is the regulation that's complementing that. And in speaking with Jackie, there's just a couple tweaks we're going to do to this regulation to streamline some of the language. The crowdfunding piece is separate in relation to general fundraising, but there was a couple places where as we reread through it, I think we can streamline a couple places. So Jackie and I will be reposting this to Board Book, and it's no substance or material changes, just kind of condensing some of the wording to make sure that it makes sense. So what this is doing is just sharing with folks that in general, for our general fundraising and for our crowdfunding, we do have a process we need to go through so that folks get their campaigns or their requests approved in advance, so that the district is aware and recognizes what it is and what the process is. Sometimes crowdfunding specifically, that is kind of the new wave of how fundraising can happen compared to the traditional bake sales, rummage sales, box tops, and those type of things. It can get a little gray depending on who's running the campaign. So if it's happening outside of the district versus under district control, if boosters are running versus district staff or district programs that are running those. So we just want to be very clear and transparent on the process so that folks are aware. We support and encourage doing fundraising if that helps support those initiatives. But we just want to make sure that we have good processes in place so people understand how the funding would be used and how we're collecting those and how we're using those. So again, this is just a process piece, making sure that if for some requests that there's other requirements that the district would have to provide, that those are included in the cost of the funding, and making sure that we're aware of all those things. So again, we're just going to be doing just a minor cleanup on that, and we'll be reposting that to Board Book. Any questions on that?
Just as a point of clarification, so with it being a regulation, it's informational only.
Correct.
We don't approve.
Correct.
No thumbs up or thumbs down for us on that.
Correct.
Okay. Member Oswald?
The second paragraph says that, if outside entities such as parent PTAs and that sort of stuff raise money, it's not reported to the board, they donate it, but they're supposed to use the Google form located on the Business Services intranet page. It's right at the top under procedures. Oh, not right on the top, middle of the page. But my question is, how do they get access to the intranet page? Because that's not public.
So this is where we're doing a little bit of cleanup. So PTAs do not have to do this. This is just for those groups within inside of the district, and Jackie has instructions and information for all of our clericals.
Okay. And then my second question is that they're not allowed to start fundraising until they have approval from the district. What is the expected turnaround time from their request to approval?
Thank you for that question. Right now, our process would be that all requests would run through cabinet for review, and that meets 2 times a month. So it shouldn't be more than 2 weeks.
Okay. Can there be emergency requests? Is there a process for that? Okay.
We can walk through those processes and make sure that if there's someone who's in need, that we can address those.
Okay.
Member Kirby?
Thanks. I've talked with Peggy about this before. I'm not sure it fits in here, but for example, say the volleyball team at some school is bagging groceries. Who follows that money? Where does it go? What are the regulations that govern who spends it and how it's monitored?
So, for example, a group bagging groceries, they would have an advisor on hand. So any monies collected then are entrusted to the advisor to turn them into the school treasurer. They write up a receipt, talk about how it was generated. That would go into a fundraising revenue for that club, whichever or activity was bagging the groceries, and then that gets reported on a monthly basis to the finance department. We incorporate that into our Business Plus reporting as far as revenues and expenses. The principal, the advisor, and the principal and a student representative are supposed to sign off on any expenditures made out of those monies. The fundraising activities should be approved ahead of time by the principal, and in that process they're supposed to delineate what exactly they're to be using the funds for. So then that is followed procedurally at the site by the principal.
It's interesting, I haven't been aware of any students being involved in how those monies are spent. I mean, but that's supposedly part of the, okay, it's interesting.
You're supposed to.
Thanks.
Great. Next is new regulation 203.2R, order of the regular school board meeting bylaw. And this, I was confused by this when I read it in the packet. So this is for information, help me.
Yep, so last month you approved the change of the order of the regular school board
Yep.
meeting to include the consent agenda, and
Yep.
we changed the order of a few things and omitted one item. What this does is it just lets you know through the component of the consent agenda what items may or may not be included. So it just gives you that regulation to say these may be things but are included but not limited to. This isn't an order, this isn't, and then just to give you that sense of as we go through the consent agenda process, that any item that is listed on the consent agenda may be pulled by any board member for individual discussion and voting on separately. It doesn't need a second, it can just be a request. Our hope is that we have vetted and discussed those items that are on the consent agenda, that they're the regular or process portions like approving minutes, approving reports, that the board can feel comfortable in doing that one resolution for all of the items on the list. But certainly if there's items that need further discussion or further consideration, that any of those items can be pulled off. So again, this was just to create that process that we will go through behind the scenes that creates that consent agenda item that you'll see now. Coming up this month, we are attempting to do the consent agenda for the January meeting. So those items that are coming out of this committee, the Education Committee, and HR Committee, all of those items that we would have acted on either as a separate resolution where we've stopped the meeting and had that resolution, or as action items that got approved by the approval of the committee report will now line up and be shown individually on the consent agenda. So you'll be approving it in one rather than having those individual reports stop and start with action items. So again, this was just to say, here's the purpose of the consent in addition to the changes that we did for the order of the board meeting. Does that help?
Yep, thank you. Recognizing that I was under the impression that we weren't, I think maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought you were gonna send us some resources or so people could feel prepared ahead of this month's meeting with the consent agenda if they weren't familiar with it.
So we've set up meetings for folks to do a drive one of the consent agenda in advance, so hopefully everybody feels comfortable. We've met with our internal staff on how we're going to compile the consent agenda, so I think we feel pretty confident that it's just an orderly process of just, again, not changing any content of what we would normally do, just the order in which we would approve those things.
Thank you. Member Lofeld?
Is the dry run for all board members or just the leadership group?
I think it was just those that were going to have to run the meeting so
Okay.
that they're aware of where the components are. You'll be seeing it in advance when it gets posted, and then there'll be a memo that will come out just again explaining how the components got there and how the process was created. So you'll see kind of an overview of how we got to where we have the consent agenda.
Great. Anything else on that piece? Okay. Moving on to the bylaw 213, the school board committee's bylaw, which is removing all of our committees.
So this is a draft of the policy to start the process to utilize the board committee's bylaw. What this does, if you have it up or looking at 213, what it does is, rather than identifying permanent standing committees as part of the policy, it would allow, and it continues to allow, this doesn't change, that the board can then create any committee through resolution. So that once that resolution has been created, that becomes a committee, and it doesn't have to be identified specifically in the policy. So then Similarly to creating a business committee or an education committee or a policy committee or any other committee the board wants to create, those would be created through resolution, which the policy already allows for, but it doesn't take and put those standing committees as specific line items in our policy. So they happen through the process, but we don't identify them individually. So we're not necessarily taking them away. We're saying we're going to create those through resolution and allow them to be created or rescinded as the board sees them necessary. I studied several school districts' policies for school board committees, and while some do identify their committees in, several do not, so that gives us the opportunity to have those committees as needed. The second piece in C, which is the addition of the clarification of the committee of the whole meeting, here sometimes we interchange the wording of what the committee of the whole is. Sometimes it appears as if there's action taken at the committee of the whole, and I think we've clarified that when we need a meeting that needs action, that would be a special board meeting. A committee of the whole in this area where we have just the clarification is that these are structured to be discussion meetings and that no action would be intended to be taken at a committee of the whole, so considered a work session. So this just adds language, and this is coming out of another district's policy, that just clarifies what the committee of the whole would be if we were to call a committee of the whole meeting versus a special board meeting. I think in the past we've used special board meeting and committee of the whole interchangeably, so that if we needed a special meeting just to have discussion, so that at, say, the next action meeting, which might be a regular board meeting or special meeting, the committee of the whole allows for that discussion. So that's just, again, just a clarification piece on C. Does anyone have any questions on that portion?
I don't on that portion. I've been out of the country for a week, so I'm flat-footed here. But where is this coming from? Like what is the genesis behind bringing this to us?
Sure. So just in the process, my hope, is that we could create some new committees, which one would be a policy committee. I think since I came to the district last year, my hope was rather than having policies running through 3 separate committees, we could have the clarification that there could be a policy committee that would work through those processes. The other piece that I would hope is that we could combine human resources and business services. Right now they run back to back, and we say that one is 15 minutes, but sometimes it lasts an hour and a half. So folks that are coming to business committee may often have to wait hours before our committee starts. So it would make sense to me to combine those 2 committees together, so that right now the policy has our standing committees as human resources and business services separate, but it seems to make sense to me, since they run back to back, that we could run those concurrently and just have a shared agenda. In addition, with some of the things coming up in relation to facilities, that an ad hoc facilities committee meeting seems to make sense. So as we were walking through the idea of creating potentially or amending some of our committee structures, just going through and streamlining the language of our policy made sense, so that we could then do some consideration of different committees.
Member Lofeld?
So I really think the impetus came from our subcommittee that Member Oswald and Loeffler Kemp and myself were on, and we had kind of this conversation. I can remember, and I really appreciate CFO Erickson's, lead to help us, because I would remember get to meetings and say, well, we can't really do a lot because we have policy. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm new at policy especially, but I think what we're trying to do is create a policy that opens up our ability to make some determination of what we want with our committees. It's not going to wipe our committees away that we have right now. It's just going to take a resolution or a policy that will open up our ability to have conversation about what we might think our board needs if we're looking at committees, so that we're not hamstringed by a policy that doesn't even allow us to move forward until we change the policy. So I think that's what this policy is coming for the first reading, is just to get a a policy that we have committees, but we don't have to name them, and we don't have to define them, because then if we want to do something different, we don't have to change a policy. We just have to come forward with a resolution.
Mm-hmm. So the board may choose not to change any of the structure and maintain the policy, the committees that we have and the structure that we have. All they would need to do then is have a resolution that these are the committees, and by resolution it would say who the members are, the term, and the charge of the committees. So again, this would just be to give the district the opportunity to amend or create, and this did come out of a year's worth of discussion through the subcommittee work, and I think there had been some discussion at different points throughout the year, but this just kind of gives us that opportunity. Also in section 4, this is where we now realize that we need to discuss what the committee structure is going to look like, whether it is going to be all members are members of the committee, or are committee members the membership of the committee. And you can see that we have the language stricken that says school board members are welcome to attend and participate in all standing committees. And we know that that's not the case. We've been told now that we actually can't do that. So it either needs to be a committee of the whole, where all members, then we need a quorum of 4, are attending, or if it is actually going to be a committee where committee members are assigned, then those people are the people that are in the membership of that committee, and then other members are not able to participate in that committee. So we just need the clarification of whether these committees will be all members or will be assigned by the chair, that they'll be committee membership. So that's the other piece that we've had some. So last month we made the motion that only members could attend the committee meeting, so people couldn't come. Then for this month we changed it back so that we needed 4 people to attend, because we weren't sure the direction we wanted to go. So we'll need some clarification from the board on how that will look. I know that I think committees have been appointed, but there hasn't really been clarification if that means all members are still participating, and that would mean actually that all members are members of the committee. So we're looking for direction on that as well.
Member Oswald?
Would these committees have an assigned time every month? Or would, because if I'm listening to Member Lofald's comments, it seemed like they could be rotating, or, whenever, we could do them one week, and the next week it could be different, and we can meet 4 times if we wanted. I mean, how does this look on a calendar?
I think depending on what the board intent of the committee is and the board structure that they would like to see, some of the committees may just be that continued standing committee at a particular time, others that may be working on a specific task. I would say even the subgroup work that you're doing as far as being liaisons for the superintendent search, you're doing work as if you're sort of a subcommittee of a committee. And so you're doing work at any time, and things are happening. So similarly, if there was a specific project or a specific topic that needed time where it met multiple times in a short period of time, or was a standing regular committee, I think that would be at the call of what the committee's purpose would be.
And how are we going to incorporate media coverage in our committees, knowing that they have scheduled lives?
Yep, all meetings are open to the public, and all municipalities run committees all the time. You can look at cities, counties. Some meetings are meet at 9 o'clock in the morning. Some people meet at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They're all public and they're all scheduled. We have the 3-day notice, which is based on statute, and so how those get attended, I think, is just the process of government, and we see that in many ways throughout all types of organizations.
And will we have to vote separately on whether these committees would be recorded or not? Or would that be incorporated, or is that just an understanding?
I think that would be the nature of the resolution and how that would be as process, and that would be running through the board.
Okay.
So I think part of why I'm struggling with this is because we're like trying to kind of shove sausage into a casing, because really we should be determining committee structure based on work that's dictated in a strategic plan, but because we don't have a strategic plan, it's difficult to do that. So I kind of have a hard time. I just worry, I think I'm just not understanding, and I can maybe have a conversation with you separately, CFO Erickson, about this, but that if we take away, so if I'm understanding this correctly, we would just be taking out language that would hamstring us, too many pig references, I get it, into specifics, when really we're trying to broaden it and recognize that we can create standing committees and ad hoc committees as needed to support the strategic direction of the district. How and when then, and then any member of the school board could establish by resolution a standing or ad hoc committee.
Correct.
So that would be, it wouldn't matter who was chair or...
It would have to be passed.
Right.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right, Member Lofeld? Chair Lofeld?
So I think you have some good questions, and I think I'm glad this is on the first reading, and this might take a little bit more. But I think some of those specifics, I wonder too if, I don't know if some committees really do warrant, a standard time and taped, so that if the policy committee or the finance committee or whatever, or any ad hoc committee facilities, because it's an important issue, but we do have a selected group working on it from the school board, so it's not a quorum, that we would videotape that, and because we would want to watch from wherever, so that would facilitate, but I don't know that. And again, I can't wait till the rest of the board gets here, and I see this work of kind of looking at our committees and how we can be successful for both our role on the board and working for what's best for our kids and moving things forward that are going to just kind of help our kids succeed, because we are in a structure where our time is used better and committee the whole might be used. I kind of have been doing a lot of work on this even after our subcommittee left, but I'm excited to bring the rest of us in. But we might have to have a work session for this topic. I don't think that precludes us from moving forward with maybe looking at this policy and just allowing it to be broader as a policy, knowing that we're going to move forward with more specifics. But
Member Oswald?
I would hope with the implementation of this policy, once it's passed, that we could that it wouldn't be implemented until we could have a board retreat to discuss strategic planning, to decide what committees we do want to create. I think that encompasses all of our questions. And I do understand that even subcommittees and committees, they all are open public meetings. The on the public record part is important to me. I think if we didn't have our committees recorded, that's a step backwards in transparency. And when we know we're being recorded, we stick to the topics. We don't, we use civility much more closely because we know we're being recorded, and it's interaction with our voting public too. When we're in subcommittees, I keep saying sub because I think they're smaller, but what the committee, when we're in a committee, and if it's not recorded, we're not accountable, and that's my take on that. Although I know this policy doesn't encompass recording, so, but I would not vote against. I would vote against anything to be less transparent.
And just for clarification, this is a first draft so that we could have discussion. This certainly was meant to engage dialogue and to get feedback and to understand. I think from a district perspective, what we're looking for is the opportunity to streamline the committee structure, to have an opportunity to have some committees that we currently don't have that seem to make sense, so that, again, we can put the topic areas in committees that make sense, so that we can do more efficient work, so that we're not necessarily having delays or shifts. I think especially in our policy area, since I've been here, we've tabled policies several times because other folks have weighed in later on. So this way, it kind of, if we have that structured policy committee, every committee sits, every interest sits at the table so that we can then go through those things. And if it appears to be a HR policy, but it has a financial consequence, then we can sit at the table and say, here's some other considerations. So I think that was really the intent, was to say, we just wanted to streamline the language. It wasn't necessarily to change the intent of any of our committees, but to allow the policy language to give the board the opportunity to create committees as needed, to create new ones, and not, again, to define those things in policy language. By resolution allows those policies to be created. So we do that in tandem so that we would know that by having agendas and having a committee structure set up, that was done by the work of the board. So again, this really was not to do any huge changes, but just to provide some streamlining and to allow the board to decide what policies make the most sense. And certainly I'm coming today to say that policy makes sense. The collaboration of human resources and business makes sense to me, since that one meeting is usually relatively short and this one can become substantial. So I think that just makes sense to me, so that we can run those, and then in addition to maybe some ad hoc committees where we see need coming up, such as facilities.
Okay. I'm going to need to noodle on this one a little bit more. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with, like, shouldn't the direction on the committee structure come from the board based on the strategic objectives that we set forward from the district? I mean, I think we're just kind of doing a lot of this in reverse, and I really appreciate you bringing this to us, CFO Erickson. I'm struggling because this is work that we're kind of doing it backwards. And so and I also want to make sure that our efforts and energies as board members are being used where they're most useful, and then keep us out of stuff where we don't need to be used. So I think that there are some discussions that we have in committee meetings that really we should just be saying, let's have the staff do that. But I think a lot of that's because we're I don't know. I mean, we're all here because we support ISD 709 and the betterment of the district. That's why all of us are sitting around the table. But I think part of the reason some of these conversations are challenging is because we're not always headed in the same direction, because we don't have those lanes that we've established as board members. So I think that's where, when it comes to, committees should be the legwork that goes behind the strategies, right? And so I think that's kind of where I'm struggling with. Why are we talking about this if we don't have this part upstream done? And that's what I want us to have done, so that this would make more sense. But I also understand we have to deal with where we are now. And I appreciate that, and I think what my hope is that this change in language allows the board to then have that discussion of what committees do you want to have. And so it just really frees up, the policy frees you up to then have those discussions to say what committees do you want to create, to Member Oswald's suggestion of having a board retreat, or however you come to a consensus of what those are. Really, our recommendation right now is taking the same topics we talk about and framing them into different committees. We already talk about policy in every committee, so we're just asking to move a committee that does all of that work in one time versus having committee discussions in 3 separate committees. Doing the work of the human resource HR is, again, just a streamlining thing. So it's not changing the content. It's not changing the work that we're already doing. It's just saying, since you're already in the room and you're already here, let's work together. These are just a couple of the recommendations that we have. But again, the intent was to say,
this gives you the opportunity to create those committees as you see needed. And this would come from you, not necessarily coming from us. I'm certainly making a couple recommendations, I think, from a clarity standpoint versus a substance standpoint. But our intent was to just say, let's clean up the language to allow the words to work, which would be using resolutions to create committees that you would see as a board, as a whole board, because you'd be approving them as a board, as needed. So, and then it gives you that opportunity to do that and approve that. If they have to go through policy, we have to go through 2 readings before we can enact those. So by putting a committee through policy, it takes us a longer period of time. You as a board can pass that resolution, that committee gets created, and then we could start that work.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right. Next on the agenda, we have donations, lots of donations this last month to report. So a big thanks to everyone who donated quite a number of goods and services. Then we have some changes to authorized bank signatures. On page, 39, resolution 3710, the 2 schools that don't have new, we're just not adding additional signatories to those 2.
It's just that those people have not been identified yet.
Okay.
It's an open position.
Okay, thank you. All right, resolution, the next one, B-1-20-3711, authorizing the listing of historic Old Central High School for sale. Front page paper.
This came out of our agenda meeting, which wasn't initially on our business committee agenda. We had some conversation regarding the facilities process that we have discussed here in this committee for the past several months. And one of the process pieces that we know about is that in June of this past year, we had the feasibility report done on this building. We were made aware of over $48 million of required repairs, not necessarily improvements, but repairs just to make this building, the deficiencies whole. And from that was the discussion of, do we as a district want to start investing those dollars into this building, or are there opportunities for us to be considering a potential relocation from this building and looking at what other options the district may have if that large scale investment is not something that the district would choose to do. With that, in order to understand and gauge interest of what this building would look like, we were advised that it makes sense to list the property with not necessarily the intention to sell, but to, again, just to see what interest is out there in the community from folks that might be interested in an alternate use for this building. So from that discussion, in order for you as board members to be thoughtful about making a decision of whether or not the long-range plan should be that we remain in this building, we needed to get a sense of what it would mean if we weren't. And so that discussion came out of, and that we would put this forward just to say, we're listing it. Certainly it has attracted some conversation. And again, we feel that this just gives us that sense of information collection that we can do, that we can share with you to say, this would be another option for us to be considering as we're wondering what type of investment and how do we address that large-scale feasibility report that has been sitting there that we really haven't done anything specifically with, because one, it's just a huge daunting dollar amount, and what kind of investment should we be making, or are there better ways for us to invest dollars to utilize space in a more efficient way? Does that help answer?
So, yeah, all of that background makes sense. It seems to me, though, that there's a lot of pieces of information that I would want before I would be okay moving forward listing it. And I'd have to pull up the long-range facilities plan. How much money do we have that's built in for this coming year for upgrades? Nothing to the building. And what is the role that this building may or may not play depending on what happens with boundary studies, and how would new Central High School potentially be impacted if we sold this building? And I mean, are those parts of the conversations that you guys have been having?
Yes, and as you recall, we were asked to move forward with exploring options for this building when we came to you in June and saw the expense of this building. As we have progressed and as there's been interest in this building, we can't really gauge the value of the building without knowing who's interested. We know that whatever an asking price would be is affected by the $48 million of work that it needs without even creating something else. So we know that whoever would be interested would be making a significant investment. However, without it being listed, we don't know the width and breadth of interest. So it could attract interest and be valued at a higher amount. That is to be able to compare it to other strategies, other places that we have been looking at. We've considered a lot of different things, and we are at a point where we need more information to be able to move forward. Certainly, any next steps would be decided by the board. If anything came forward, if any offer came forward on any of the properties, the board is notified in closed session of those.
Member Oswald?
Is it my correct understanding that a private developer could make these repairs more affordably than us because they're eligible for things like historic preservation money, which I believe is 20% federal and 20% state matched? And that is this building contained in the medical district, and are there incentives for that too? And is that being considered in whatever asking price that we may come up with? That's a lot in one. So
it is. I think I've got most of the list in my head. It's true. A school district does not have access to the same kinds of funding that a private investor would have. One would be the historic tax credits. Another is that this property sits within an opportunity zone, which is federal funding, and it has a timeline on it. And so there is some sensitivity to timing. And then the city has indicated support of the development of this building as well to a private developer, whoever that might be. And so there is at least a trifecta of financial opportunities for an investor that we as a school district would not have access to. There would also be other funding sources available depending on what a developer was going to do with the building. That is the art of developing properties. I think we saw it with George Sherman developing the theater and getting access to historic tax credits, to arts credits, to collaborative communities, and there would no doubt be a variety of funding sources that they would be using and that we wouldn't have access to. The only dollars that we would have access to is long-term facilities maintenance funding, which is a levy-based fund.
And if I may continue, is there any way we can guarantee to the public that this building will not be torn down?
Well, it's not in my plan.
Is that something, because I know in our sales of other buildings that we have clauses in there, like it can't house another school. So is there some kind of clause we can put in our contract for sale?
Yes, there would be clauses in the sale. There would be restrictions. It's also in the historic registry, and so it is protected.
Right, but so is Pastorate Terrace, I believe so. And that's, been sitting there for a long time. So I don't want them to say, I've already had public come to me and say, yeah, but that place. So I just want to know that if we can assure the public that, we're not going to sell it if it's going to just be torn down.
I think once if there should be an offer, those are the conversations that we would need to be prepared to have. And I certainly understand the desire to create information for you so that you can feel comfortable. But truly, this was just to raise awareness for those folks who maybe would have an interest in development that this might be on the market. And again, this doesn't obligate the district to sell it. We can entertain and reject any offer. If the board, through our processes and through our facilities discussions that we have, decides that this is where we want to be and this is where we want to invest our dollars, we don't have to sell. But the opportunity for us to put it out there so that we can utilize those marketing and public information areas to let people know if there are people of interest who could be a better caretaker. This is the one thing that I know we've had discussions about, and I know all of you as board members and many community members, this is an iconic building. This is an amazing building that I walk through every day. We don't have the funds to adequately do what needs to be done in this building, and if we had to defer this $48 million away from other things that we could be doing because we needed to put it in this building, I think that's a big ask for the board to consider. And so if there are opportunities to find someone who shares that same passion and wants to see this building be all it can be, and they have additional resources like these funding sources that we can't get access to, that's all we're trying to learn. I don't know that we're exactly saying we're committing to that, but then we can give those folks that might be interested an opportunity to research and come to a conclusion that they do have access to funding that we don't have. So I really do know that this is a very important decision, but I think what we're trying to do by asking you to consider this resolution is for us to collect as much information as we can to find out what the public interest might be, and then come back to you to say, here are those options. What's difficult for us is if we don't know if we're leaving this building or considering a relocation from this building, it's very difficult to make recommendations on what other options that we have. So what we're really trying to do is say, we'd just like to provide you as much information as we can so that we can make solid recommendations for you to consider.
Kathy, we'll have you be the spokesperson for the sale of it. That was a very touching plea. No, I mean, I think it makes sense. And we did charge you all with kind of considering Mr. Spooner gave us that thorough presentation over the summer of everything that needed to be updated, and I think it makes sense for us to be good stewards of the dollars and good stewards of this historic property. Would the same listing agent that we've been working with on our other properties list this? And does he have experience working with building? Does it matter if he has experience working with buildings on the historic registry?
It would be our intention that we would use the same realtor as we were using with other properties, and he has experience with other historic properties in the city.
Okay. The next resolution is on the 2020 legislative platform.
So again, this is just that one-line resolution that you would be approving our legislative platform. You have seen the text at our last business committee meeting, and again, before your Tuesday regular school board meeting, you'll see it in its full-colored bifold form. And again, if anyone has any questions on any of the content areas, it does talk through those main areas of discussion. We will continue to have a separate one-page special education ask for specifically for Duluth. It's in our bifold. It talks about continuing the work we started last year in educating the legislature, and in the hopes that we could get that correction on the funding that we would need. And we would, again, just tweak that a little bit because we are seeing some special education funding changes in fiscal year 21. And we've had yet another year of the funding being off because we haven't had that change. So we'd be adjusting what the statistics are regarding what our district could have generated had our legislation been corrected back in 2016. So we'll be doing that as well. And then any other work that we're doing in relation to facilities, if there were additional asks that we would need to do, that we would bring that forward as well. So we'll just keep you posted. But the content of our platform as a district, which is very similar to most other districts in the state, are funding special education, looking at our general education formula allowance, looking at mental health, looking at our areas of our full service community schools, looking at LTFM, the long-term facilities maintenance, to expand the uses of those dollars. That is one thing that most districts throughout the state are requesting. Many of our associations are also requesting those changes as well. And there's just some limitations on how you can utilize those dollars, and we're just, along with many other people, asking for consideration that those dollars could be used in an expanded way.
I wasn't sure if, since Jeff was here, if he was going to do like a full song and dance for us, but we will have time to review it again before Tuesday.
Yes.
So,
and again, the text has been available, but we will get that full color bifold available to you.
Great. All right, moving on to informational items. There were a number of expenditure contracts. Any questions there? Oh, sorry, Member Oswald.
Is the kindergarten commercial for kindergarten roundup the Captivate for $1,500?
Yes.
Maybe you want to put that in there, like kindergarten roundup rather than just the kindergarten commercial. Look, we got kindergarten. I mean,
I thought it was pretty self-explanatory. But
It is generally about kindergarten and not specific to Roundup, but it's part of our Roundup marketing.
okay, we just had a couple of no-cost contracts. Any questions there? Okay, property sale updates. We had a little bit of a more thorough report this month. So any questions on that? Okay, and then we have the famous facilities management and capital project status report. Mr. Spooner.
I always have lots to live up to. But I do have to say December was much calmer than November. It was a pretty standard month. The report isn't real big. Maintenance and operations primarily focused on snow removal, snow bank removal, making sites safe for travel in and out, ice removal. It was a good month. We kept the buildings clean. We moved snow, and it was a pretty standard month, and I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody might have from the report.
I think I had asked last month about how our incidences were in comparison to prior years.
Right, you did, and I talked to Jason Barsness, our health and safety coordinator, and he and our insurance company compile that information in January.
That's right.
And if the board
right.
desires, we could have them come to the either February, if they have it, or March Business Committee meeting, do
I
a
think it's
presentation.
helpful to know.
Sure, we can work on that.
Great. All right. Well, with that, that wraps up the business committee.